Very, very honored to have our special guest, New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, with us today. As always, a couple of our preliminaries and some introductions as well. First, I want to introduce the chairman of the LIA, my dear friend Kirk Kordeleski, the president and CEO of Bethpage Federal Credit Union. Kirk. Also like to introduce a dear friend, somebody who's doing a terrific job, Nassau County Executive Ed Mangano. Perfectly on cue. Suffolk County Executive Steve Malone. And Mayor, if you notice, the smile that Ed Mangano has is that now Suffolk Finance is on the front page of Newsday and not just Nassau. Also, we're very lucky to have one of the best representatives in the House of Representatives, our dear friend and a great supporter of the LIA, Pete King. And we also have some other elected officials here. Our supervisor of the town of North Hempstead, John Kamen. John. Mayor Ralph Swazi from the city of Glen Cove. And former Suffolk County Executive Pat Halpin. Pat. I miss any electeds? Matt Cohen? All right. No? We're good?
Former Nassau.
Where's Tom?
Swazi.
Hey, Tom. Tom Swazi, former Nassau County Executive. You could have been in the front row, Tom. You're back here. Very good. Thanks, Tom. And Mark Lesko is maybe on the way. One plug or two plugs, two upcoming programs here for the LIA. Next Monday in this room, we'll have the president of the New York Federal Reserve Bank, William Dudley, here. If you're interested in being our guest, please let us know. And also, because for the first time in a real long time, it looks like the GOP primary for the presidential election will be relevant in New York. We have invited the GOP candidates. We've already heard from Governor Mitt Romney's office and Senator Santorum's office. I guess depending upon what happens today in Alabama and Mississippi, we'll hear maybe from Newt Gingrich's office, and we're looking to put together a date in the middle of April. They're all interested in participating in a forum before the business community here. We all know Mayor Bloomberg, but not everybody may know everything about his background, and while he has a very impressive, extensive bio, I pulled out some of the highlights that I thought were worth really noting, because it really is a terrific story. Michael Bloomberg is the 108th mayor of the New York City. He was first elected in November 2001, 2 months after the terrorist attacks on 9/11. A time when many believed that crime would return, businesses would flee, and New York would take decades to recover. But instead, through the leadership of Mayor Michael Bloomberg, the city has grown safer, stronger, and greener than ever. Mayor, congratulations. The mayor was born in Boston, raised in a middle-class home in Medford, Massachusetts, attended Johns Hopkins, went on to Harvard Business School, where he got his MBA. In 1966, he was hired by Salomon Brothers for an entry-level job and rose through the ranks, soon becoming the head of their information systems. And then when Salomon was acquired, Mayor Bloomberg was actually let go. And so knows what it's like when there's a merger or acquisition and people are let go. But that didn't stop him. He launched a small startup company called Bloomberg LP. Today, Bloomberg LP is a global media company that has over 310,000 subscribers to its financial news and information services. It's headquartered in New York City, but has over 15,000 employees worldwide. As his company grew, Mayor Bloomberg started directing more and more of his time through philanthropy and then eventually politics. In 2001, he ran for the mayor of the city of New York and won in a major upset. He was reelected in 2005, 2009. During his 3 terms, Mayor Bloomberg has turned around a broken public school system. He has spurred economic growth and job creation by revitalizing old industrial areas and strengthening key industries. His passion for public health has led to ambitious new health strategies that have become national models, including a ban on smoking in all indoor workplaces as well as at parks and beaches. And he has also created a far-reaching plan to fight climate change, promote sustainable development on an unprecedented scale. He also has launched an ambitious national bipartisan coalition to combat illegal guns. But most important, and the mayor would agree, is that he is the father of 2 beautiful daughters, Emma and Georgina. I had the privilege of working with the mayor when I was running LIPA, and we were discussing our plans to develop an offshore wind project off the coast of the Rockaways, and LIPA serves part of New York City and the Rockaways. He's always been a terrific partner on economic development issues, energy matters, and the LIA, Long Island, is very, very honored to welcome Mayor Michael Bloomberg for his first presentation here.
Kevin, thank you. And I did want to particularly thank the county executives, Ed Mangano and Steve Ballone. I am going to be a big taxpayer in Suffolk County, and I want to, but I don't work in Suffolk County, so maybe you want to redress the imbalance between how much property owners pay versus employees or something or other.
We'll check your assessment.
I'm scared to death to look at what that's going to be. Yes, I did raise the assessment. You owe me big time for this one. Actually, somebody said that they're surprised to see me on Long Island at this hour in the morning. Usually they said I'm 3 holes in and 5 over par, and that's on a good day. Anyways, I have to, in all fairness, give credit to credit is where credit is due. The Reverend Calvin Butts has been bugging me to speak before you for years. He is persuasive, but the real answer is he is a pain in the rear because he just doesn't stop until you say yes. So I'm glad I finally made it. They owe you, or I owe you, or something, and happy birthday to your mother once again. I certainly would be remiss if I didn't say thank you to someone who really has made a difference on Long Island, but most importantly, made a difference for this country, and that is Pete King. I don't know anybody that has argued. I've watched Pete for the 10 years that I've been in office. He just never lets up. He always is working for this country. He did it when the Republicans were in a minority in Congress. He does it when he's a committee chair, now that they're in the majority. He and his wife attend every event. He's got a good ear for people. They are super nice people, both of them. And if you need somebody to stand up for America and stand up for policies that are right, even when they're not popular, when it comes to defending this country, we owe a lot to Pete King. So Pete, thank you very much. Pete, well, you should know that under the new congressional lines being drawn by the state legislature, Pete now, his area includes not only New York's 5 counties, New York City's 5 counties, but also Ireland's 32 counties. Actually, he may be the only person who marches in as many St. Patrick's Day parades as I do, and I'm only half Irish. Somehow or other, St. Patrick's Day became St. Patrick's Month, and God forbid you miss one of the parades. Anyways, seriously, the chance to come here was something I jumped at because New York City is facing some of the very same challenges that Long Island is facing, and we are at a critical junction. And that is what's happening to us in the pension system, and that's what I wanted to talk about. New York City, Nassau County, and Suffolk County really are, broadly speaking, all in the same boat. We're all trying to break out of a sluggish national economy. We're all trying to attract new investment and create jobs, and we're all facing a ticking time bomb that, if it's not diffused, really will destroy our ability to accomplish these 2 goals. And that time bomb is our public pension system. And today, that's exactly what I wanted to talk about, what is at stake in the pension debate that is now playing out in Albany. Long Island and New York City are much more than just geographic neighbors of New York City, which is where my responsibilities lie. They are connected by a lot more than just roads and railroads. We share the single most valuable economic asset that you can possess, and that is a quality of life that attracts talented people. By offering people safe streets, great schools, beautiful parks, and cutting-edge cultural opportunities, we attract people. And people attract companies, and companies attract investment. Recently, world-class companies like Condé Nast and Google and JetBlue, Twitter, Facebook, FreshDirect, and Coach have all made major commitments to invest in New York City. Cornell and the Technion Institute of Israel recently won, as you know, a hotly contested competition for the right to build a $2 billion world-class applied science campus on Roosevelt Island in the middle of the East River, which will create tens of thousands of jobs and help transform New York City and the whole region's economy. Yet, notwithstanding these major investments and the fact that New York City has weathered the national recession far better than most other cities, I think it's fair to say that the enormous growth in our pension costs threaten to undo the progress we made and severely damage our long-term economic health. You should read an op-ed piece in today's Wall Street Journal about what's going on in California, which really is a role model for just a prescription for exactly how you don't run something and how you create a downward spiral, which is very hard to get out of. The pension reform problem is a problem that it shows you how difficult it is to get things done in government. To convince elected officials to look beyond today and beyond the next election and plan for the future. In New York City, we started planning for the national economic downturn in the year 2007, a year before the financial meltdown happened. We began cutting budgets and putting money aside for the future because we knew that no economic boom goes on forever. And that helped us save something like $6 billion in recurring expenses for each year. Now, $6 billion is a lot of savings, even for a city that has a budget of $70 billion. But unfortunately, over the last decade, during the same period when we saved $6 billion annually by cutting costs, our pension costs have gone up $6.5 billion. If you think about it, when I came into office at the beginning of 2002, New York City's pension bill was $1.5 billion a year. Today, it's over $8 billion 10 years later. And that means pension costs have eaten up every single dollar of the savings that we managed to put together. Savings that was gotten by cutting back, making things go further, doing more with less. We now spend more on pensions than we do on the operating budgets of the NYPD, the fire department, and the sanitation department combined. Just think about that. The operating costs of our police, fire, and sanitation departments do not add up to what we are paying for pensions. And next year, every penny in personal income tax that we collect in New York City will go to pensions. And we'll still be short. It won't quite do it all. Over the past decade, pension costs in New York City have increased by more than 600%. Now, you've seen the same kind of growth in pension costs here on Long Island, only worse. In Nassau, pensions have increased 865% over the past decade, and in Suffolk, growth has been 904%. Just think about that. Think about what it would mean in your life if every cost went up at the same rate as pension costs. Long Island Railroad prices, if they had tracked the pension costs, the price of a one-way ticket from Huntington to Penn Station, which is now $13.50 at rush hour, would be $125. $125. And that's only one way. Imagine paying $250 for a round trip to Penn Station. Even I don't think it's worth that. And we'd love to have you come in and spend some money. Or imagine, what about $20 for a slice of pizza? A cheese slice. You want pepperoni, it's going to be more. Can you imagine your property tax bill? As Marty Markowitz says in Brooklyn, forget about it. The huge growth, seriously, in pension costs has been the largest single driver of increased government spending in New York City. No other budget item has gone anywhere near as much to contribute to our problems as our pension bill. If you are a fiscal conservative or even a fiscal moderate, the case for pension reform could not be stronger. But just in case you are a liberal or a progressive, let me tell you this case for pension reform for you. It's just as strong, because as pensions consume an even larger proportion of our annual budget, that leaves less and less for everything else. The $6.5 billion more that we're spending every single year now on pensions is money that we're not using to fund child care, housing for the homeless, libraries, summer jobs for teens, senior centers, parks, environmental protection, and all of the other things that the public seems to want. And that's why, with the exception of education, spending by nearly every other New York City agency is actually going down. We, in the last 10 years, have reduced the size of city government by about 7% of our employees, and our rate of our growth in costs, with the exception of education, has been less than the rate of inflation for 10 years, unless you count pensions. Pensions have gone up 500 or 600%, depending on how you want to measure it. Everything else about 32%. There will be, the pensions costs don't get under control. If we don't get them under control, I don't think there's any mystery about what will happen next. You're going to have to raise taxes and cut more. Cuts will go into the bone the next time, cuts to police and fire, sanitation, economic development, and the social services that the most vulnerable citizens rely on every day. You might say, well, I'm willing to live with more cuts to essential services, or you could say, I'm willing to pay more taxes. But there is just one problem with that. We can't afford to do either of those things. We are already one of the highest taxed regions in the country. If we raise taxes, our greatest asset, people, will leave. And if people leave, our tax base will shrink, our economy will suffer, and we'll be left in an even worse position. But if we cut the bone of core services and stop making investments in the future, again, people will leave. Our tax base will shrink, our economy will suffer, and we'll be left in an even worse position. Now, there is a solution, at least a long-term solution, and I think it's fair to say Governor Cuomo recognizes just how much is at stake, and he has taken on this cause, and I'm here to support him. Pension reform was one of his campaign platforms in 2010, and this year he has made it his top priority, and I think the governor does deserve real credit for taking on these issues. This is not an easy one. There are those who want to preserve the status quo, but Governor Cuomo's reform plan, I think, is a common sense, balanced approach that will strengthen the pension system long-term by ensuring that it will be able to deliver the benefits that have been promised to existing workers, and it will do so without impacting the benefits of one single retiree or one current worker, not by one penny. The important point, let me repeat this, Governor Cuomo's pension reform plan will not impact any retiree or existing workers. It will only impact workers not yet hired, people who we don't owe anything to, we haven't offered jobs to yet. Now, I believe public employees deserve a fair and competitive retirement package, and existing workers and retirees should get every penny that they're promised. The fact of the matter is the state constitution requires us to pay everything that's promised. In our state constitution in New York, there is a provision that says if the state legislature grants a benefit to any municipal worker in the state, even the legislature can't take it away. Just think about that. It is an amazing piece of legislation put in by some very smart labor lawyer many years ago. But that's exactly what we're facing. None of us can cut today's pension costs. What we can do is stop the growth. Now, some people say, oh, well, you know, there's plenty of time to do that. That's like saying to somebody who is overweight and suffers heart problems, don't bother to go on a diet today. You'll be fat tomorrow as well, no matter whether you do or you don't. Come on. We cannot afford simply to pay workers' retirement packages tomorrow that just are out of line with what the private sector and other municipalities pay. Under the governor's plan, future workers would still receive a pension that is generous by private sector standards and at least as generous as most other pension systems around the country. and certainly strong enough to attract a talented workforce. The bottom line is municipal jobs, certainly in this region, are great jobs, and we do not have any problems in attracting good, qualified people to fill those. So if we have to pay less pension benefits to those that we have yet to hire, it's not going to hurt our ability to provide services. And there are those who make the argument, oh, how can you have two people working side by side doing essentially the same job that get paid differently? Well, the governor is trying to get the legislature to pass a law that would create a Tier 6, a new level of benefits. Last time I took math, if you have a Tier 6, you must have a 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So think about that. You've got people working at all different levels, and that's true in the private sector as well. In the governor's plan, future non-uniform workers would be able to start receiving retirement benefits at age 65, which is when almost all private sector workers are eligible to retire, and when most Americans become eligible to receive Social Security and Medicare benefits. Right now, public employees in New York State are eligible to retire earlier than workers in the private sector, in some cases as early as age 55. But people today are living longer than when our pension system was designed, and we have to adjust for that for future workers, and we're going to have to do that at a national level. If you think about it, Social Security's retirement age of 65 was picked because nobody thought anybody would live till 65. Life expectancy was a lot shorter then, and there are very few people that would ever receive those benefits. Today, life expectancy, I'm 70 years old, and my life expectancy is to 86. So, you know, there's an awful lot of years when I could take those benefits, and the system was never designed to do that. And I think it's fair to say it is neither morally nor fiscally responsible to continue to promise new workers benefits that we just can't afford, and that if we don't face this issue now, we are going to have to face it down the road, because at some point the public is just going to stand up and say, no mas, we're not going to take this anymore, and you will see a real revolt. Not just people calling their assembly people, but people really demanding their ouster. The same thing for all levels of government. And incidentally, the only thing that the governor addresses in terms, the only group of people the governor's plan addresses in the reducing or in raising the age when you get benefits is the non-uniform workers. And a very big part of municipal workers are uniform workers. This does not even affect them at all. Now, the governor's reform plan would also exclude overtime from the calculation of workers' final average salary to stop some of the abuses that have become so common. Newsday has story after story about things exactly like this, where the last few years they pad how much they work so that their pensions are going up. Nobody doesn't appreciate the hard work of public employees, but there just is a limit to how much we can afford, and we have to be able to make these decisions in the context of a bigger world. What is fair? Well, take a look. If most of the people paying the bills in the private sector have one standard, having something very different for the people they are paying is just not terribly rational. And the governor's plan, incidentally, would also ask some workers to contribute slightly more to their own pensions. And that's probably fair, because right now public workers contribute significantly less to their retirements than private sector workers do, which, as I said, is my standard for what is fair. In fact, the current public pension system is funded almost exclusively by taxpayers. In New York City, employees pay only 7% of the cost of their pensions, while taxpayers pick up the other 93%. Finally, the governor's plan would give new workers the option, entirely voluntary incidentally, of participating in a defined contribution plan like a 401k. And you listen to people yelling and screaming about this. That is absolutely, they should never be given this option. Let me point out this option would offer a much shorter vesting period than a traditional pension. The employees could take take their account with them when they leave government, something they can't do now. The mobility would be attractive to many people, especially young people who can expect to have 5 or 10 jobs over the course of their careers. When I came into the workforce, the expectation was I would work for one company for the rest of my life, and if Solomon hadn't fired me, I would now be part of Citibank, and my girlfriend is a director of Citibank, so I'd be working for her. Not a pleasant thought, but actually, State University of New York SUNY professors already have this option, and a majority of them take it. And why shouldn't the rest of the workforce have the same option? If it's too good for, is it too good for them? Are they not as capable as professors of making a choice about their financial future? I don't believe that for a second, and I'm all for giving public employees the right to choose what's for best and their families. Government shouldn't tell people what to do. Government should give people options and some advice and maybe some education on the implications, but people should be able to make their own decisions, and if we give some state employees that right, why not give it to all of them? Over the past 30 years, the governor's plan, over the next 30 years, the governor's plan would save something like almost $80 billion for New York State taxpayers, and save more than $30 billion for New York City alone. And there are some elected officials, including former Long Island Assembly member who is now our state controller, who have actually argued that because the savings from the plan wouldn't be immediately realized, we shouldn't bother with reform. I don't think you should be able to, that's a rational thing to do. The bottom line is, if we don't do it now, we're going to be in a worse situation tomorrow. Kicking the can down the road and saying to our children, you work it out, is just not something that we should be doing. Big problems require long-term planning and immediate action, and that's what we should do. And incidentally, there is another argument against pension reform that you keep seeing, and the argument is that we don't need to do anything about the pension system because all of this is because of crash of the stock market in '08. Let me tell you, I know a little bit about the stock market. If you look at the numbers, our pension bill currently is $8 billion. Before these financial sector meltdown had any impact whatsoever on our costs, the city's pension tab had already risen from $1.5 to $6.5 billion in '09. Two-thirds of that increase from two-thirds of the increase from 6.4 billion to 8.8 billion now is due to other factors other than the market's return. And in fact, if you graph the S&P 500 against our pension costs, you'll see that when the S&P goes up, our pension costs go up. When the S&P goes down, our pension costs go up. It's virtually, there's no correlation whatsoever between the two things. Yes, it's nice to have your investments return something. Keep in mind, our pension plans assume an 8% investment return, but for the last 100 years, the average pension return in real terms for the stock market is 3.5%. And the only person I know that's ever been able to make 8% consistently was named Madoff. You just can't count on something like that. Anyways, the collapse didn't help us, but the bottom line is our legislators really have to make a choice. They can do nothing and watch runaway pension costs continue to strangle city and county budgets and impose heavier and heavier burdens on taxpayers, or they can stand up and make some modest changes to future workers' pensions so we can get back on sound long-term financial footing. The stakes really are very high. They're high for New York City, they're high for Long Island, they're high for cities and counties all over the state. A few weeks ago, I was up in Albany with some mayors and executives from across the state from both parties, urban, suburban, rural. They all came together. And Steve and Ed were up there as well. And I think it's no secret that Suffolk and Nassau have been experiencing financial difficulties. And there's no ways you can look at those counties' books and not realize that the extraordinary growth in pension costs are a core part of their problem. County executives and mayors in our bipartisan coalition have tried to make their voices heard in Albany, but the state legislature really needs to hear from you. You are the voters, you are the campaign donors. Call your state representatives, tell them how important it is. If you say, well, they're not going to do what I want, just think about it. People don't act irrationally. The reason that they're reticent to vote changes is that the people who want to preserve the status quo, they believe, have more to do with their re-election than you do. You've got to change that calculus. If they believe that you're the ones that are sending them back to office from which they feed their family, they're going to pay an awful lot more attention to you, the taxpayers, and you, the voters. And we can't keep kicking the can down the road. I've talked to Majority Leader Skelos. I think Dean really does understand that reform is needed and the budget pressures from local governments something that has to be dealt with. I think Shelley Silver, the Democratic Speaker of the Assembly, understands this too. I am optimistic that we are going to get pension reform, but we're not going to let up. This week, our coalition is urging New Yorkers around the state to make their voices heard. As a matter of fact, we're airing television ads statewide calling attention to this issue. Too often in Albany, it's a special interest whose voices are heard, and I want to make sure it's the people's voices that are heard, and we are going to continue to fight. Back in the 70s, New York City saw a horror film. It was a city government tinkering on the brink of bankruptcy, and subways and bridges falling into disrepair, and parks and houses crumbling, and entire neighborhoods collapsing. Thankfully, there were some people that stood up. Ed Koch, Governor Hugh Carey, another Governor Cuomo. They steered the city through some dark days, and we've got to make sure that this time we go and do the same thing. So, Steve and Ed, I just want to say we're in New York City. We share exactly the same problems. We're in this together, and we'll do everything we can to help you, and we need all of your help. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Bloomberg. Mayor Ash, we're going to have, since we have them here as guests, just County Executive Steve Bellone and Mangano just to chime in very briefly on their support for the pension reform as well. And then the Mayor, who has a very busy schedule today, has agreed to take a couple of questions. And thank you for those who emailed me suggested questions over the weekend. So Steve, briefly, support of the Mayor?
Thank you very much, Kevin, and I want to say great job to the Mayor. We're very happy with the job you're doing as Mayor of New York, but we are looking forward to you settling down in Southampton when you retire, and we actually have some more property that you may be interested in. I'll give you a call about that. But I do want to thank the Mayor for his leadership on this issue. This is critically important. As you have seen, Suffolk County, like Nassau County, like counties and municipalities across our country today, we are facing some of the greatest challenges that we've ever had. And in Suffolk County, like in these other municipalities, pension costs are one of the big drivers of that. In 2010, Suffolk County pension costs spiked to $94 million, a huge sum for the county. By next year, those costs are expected to rise to $217 million for Suffolk County. The scariest thing about that number is unsustainable for Suffolk County. The scariest thing, though, is that those pension costs will start to stabilize around those numbers. Now, as the Mayor talked about what we do at the county level, we provide public safety, we ensure public health, and we provide a safety net for the most vulnerable among us. Those services are at risk, and this is not something that is down the line. This is something that is happening right now. In Suffolk County, there are over 400 employees that will be laid off, that are already budgeted to be gone from Suffolk County's workforce by the end of June in critical areas of our government. And that won't even come close to addressing the problems we have in Suffolk County. So this is real. This is now. I'm very proud to support the governor's proposal. I was honored to join the mayor and other local officials across the state up in Albany last week to lobby for pension reform. We need to do this so that counties and municipalities can continue to deliver the critical services that we provide. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll be brief, just warned. But let me congratulate the mayor. I certainly support pension reform. Governor Cuomo supports it. I worked with Dean Scello supporting it. Certainly the mayor and Steve Bellone and myself. We all know there's something wrong. There's something wrong in our county, our state, and our country. In order to change that around, you must have reform. And the mayor hit the nail on the head. He hit the nail on the head. How do you have that reform? We need everybody in this room to stand up and be heard. because their special interests are heard. Follow the reforms that we've initiated in Nassau County. Each one first ridiculed, then violently opposed, before it's become self-evident. Today, it is becoming self-evident. We need the change. We've reduced our head count in Nassau County by over 1,000. Yet you'll have elected officials still argue today that why reduce? How does eliminating paychecks save dollars? They must be at this point. We need reform. We need everyone in this room to be heard. Because again, I assure you, the special interests are being heard in Albany, they're being heard in Nassau County, and they're being heard in Suffolk County. So collectively, we are here today to ask for your support, your influence, and it is well deserved because we need to change around our county, our state, and our country. So thank you.
Mayor, you'll be happy to know that the LIA last year in their 2011 priorities, as well